Hello everyone, it's Panda here, and a lot of people have asked me for my thoughts on Shalom, the new limited S-rank reticle sinner. Now, I think her being limited and her also being the first magical reticle is part of the reason why a lot of people are so excited about her, right? And basically have asked me to do like a kit review of her. So basically in this video what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be doing a full kit breakdown, which basically say I'm going to be going over all the things she does. Then I'll be doing a kit review, which is trying to contextualize or project basically the kit into the current in-game we have available, stuff like BFL, TOA, and PIT. And I'm going to be talking about how I see her functioning in those environments, whether we see her shining, whether we see her struggling, and why, basically. Before I get into any of that though, I do want to give a huge shout out to Keystone V for doing these translations. Basically every time there's a new CN news, every time there are a new CN Sinner, they always make sure to give us the translations so we can stay up to date. So yeah, huge thanks to Keystone and all the other people who do these translations for us. It's just a great resource to have. Alright, but I think without further ado then, we can actually get right into a kit, which starts off fairly general, or fairly standard, let's say, with the 5% damage increase and another 5% when attacking enemy with a broken core. Nothing we haven't seen before. Main intensifies conquer the enemy, which is another 10% increase and another 10% when attacking something with a broken core. Fairly standard so far. Her basic attacks don't have any inherent properties to them, however they do actually feature a really nice scaling here. I think 153% on your basic attacks is definitely up in like, it's definitely one of the higher ones that we have available to us. However, it is slightly balanced by the fact that she has a sort of low attack speed sitting at 0.86. However, as we'll see later on, she does actually have ways of compensating for that lowish attack speed. But yeah, overall, this is just really nice basic attack. It has really good scalings on it. So yeah, you should probably expecting her to be dealing quite a bit with just the initial attacks up front. Next up we have her ultimate, which is Hush. It costs 34 and it does 2 core breaks. However, it does do the breaks a bit gimmicky. Basically, it's a 3-stage attack. The first strike deals really mediocre damage and 1 core damage to all enemies within a singular grid. We then have the second strike that deals a bit more damage and 1 core damage to all enemies within a cross grid. And then we have the last strike that deals a massive damage and no core damage to all enemies within a diamonded grid. Now that can be a bit hard to just like keep in, like visualize in your head. Let's take a look at a practical example of what that would look like. Basically in this case we can see the skill range here. So basically as the skill stated, we have the first strike that will hit a singular grid. That'll be the center tile that we are aiming at. We then have the cross grid from that, which is the second strike. And then finally the third strike will be covering all the rest of the tiles here. Now once you further recall that the first 2 strikes were the ones that does the core damage, meaning enemies within the center tile here are going to be taking 2 core damage. Meanwhile the enemies in the cross grids are going to be taking 1 core damage each. And of course everyone are going to be taking the massive amounts of burst damage from the third strike. That is to say that in this case, in this example here, what we're expecting to happen is that the first strike is going to be breaking the top elite, the second strike is going to be breaking the bottom elite, and then the third strike is going to be clearing out all the adds. So yeah, let's take a look at that and see if that's what happens. We have the first strike breaking the top elite, the second strike dealing breaking the bottom elite, and then the third strike there clearing out all of the adds. So yeah, this is obviously one of the strongest ultimates in the game, I think it's fair to say. To relate it to something we have in the game, this is basically like if you took a Reen ultimate and you then like didn't need to make any concessions whenever you use ultimate, right? Because Irene does have like a pretty huge weakness in her ultimate, that yes, it is really versatile and yes, it's quite good in that regard, but you need to make constant concessions. If you use a neutral black hole for the AoE damage, well, you're losing out on a bit of burst damage then, and you're losing out completely on the 2 core breaks. If you use it for the 2 core breaks, well, then you're losing out on a bit of the AoE damage, and you're losing out on some, a ton of the burst damage. Sorry about that. So yeah, you need to make constant concessions when you're using Arena ultimates. Because of the way Shalom's ultimate works, you don't need to make these concessions, right? Like her first 2 strikes are the ones that deal the least amount of damage. Those are the ones that deal the core damage, and they're also the ones that cover the least amount of ground. So you can definitely still imagine you using Shalom for breaking the boss. And then if the second strike is the one that fully breaks the boss, well then the third strike is losing no damage whatsoever. This is again just really nice because it's the one that deals some sort of most amount of damage. It's also the one that covers the most amount of ground, which then further means that you aren't losing any of her wave clearing capabilities whatsoever. So yeah, to me, I think this is one of, if not the strongest ultimate in the game we have right now. Which, I mean, she's a limited sinner, right? I would expect this kind of level of power creep, but it's nowhere near like, you know, game breaking as of yet. Just really, really strong, and I think it's good. Her passive wonder is basically the thing I'll talk about that kind of compensates for her lowish attack speed. This is basically allows all of her basic attacks to do bounces now. Now, they will lose a bit of damage each time, but essentially what this means is that she gets this constant flow of damage output that kind of helps her even like wave clear and stuff. As you can see in this clip, the first strike hits the first guy, then second guy, then the third guy, and then yada yada yada, until she doesn't have any more bounces left. In this case, it is 3 bounces. Now, basically just to explain the specifics of this skill, when she hit the first person, a diamonded shape was basically created to choose the next target. In this case, then it chose this guy right here, and when it bounced to him, well, another diamonded shape was made to determine the next target, which was then this guy, and then so on and so on. Now, interestingly enough, this does also mean that if we have a scenario where we have only 2 enemies, let's say these 2, what would then happen is that the attack would bounce from this guy to the second guy, and then back to the first guy again. And it would keep going between these 2 people until it doesn't have any more bounces left. We can also further imagine a scenario where we only have 1 enemy. Well, in this case, it does not actually bounce to themselves. This does not work. So she is quite dependent on having multiple enemies on the field. But yeah, I mean, it should be noted that this bounce attack, like, it still counts as a normal attack, right? It can still crit, it can still apply effects. So yeah, it's a really, really, really nice passive. Not a whole lot to say about it. Like the coverage is huge, so it's basically like map wide, and it basically allows it to be a pretty decent wave clearer. So yeah, definitely very strong. We then move on to a passive 2, which just passively increases her attack, which is always nice to see. We then have an additional property added to the ultimate, which is that whenever the ultimate like strikes an enemy, you'll basically be getting the same effect had you also like auto attack the enemy. Let's say you'll get one of these like attacks bouncing between the targets. Now it's a bit of a weird thing. I mean, we can try and spot it, but it's a bit hard to see. But it's a bit of a weird thing to have in the kit here, or at least to have affect the ultimate, because the ultimate's first strike is the one that deals the most amount of damage, right? In this case, I think you can just make out that the bounces happen from this guy to this guy. But the third strike of her ultimate is the one that covers the most amount of ground, and is also the one that deals the most amount of damage. So in that sense, these additional bounces will rarely matter, right? Because like everything will just die to the ultimate anyways. The one exception to this rule naturally is if you have a boss. In that case, the boss will always basically serve as a bounce target, and you'll basically just be seeing a ton of free damage. So I guess in that regard, it's kind of nice. But yeah, ultimately, it's not. I mean, it's not going to be a huge like game changer. It's decent. In specific circumstances, it's quite nice. Her exclusive crime brain is a bit on the, I think, tamer side of things, all things considered. How it does feature a pretty insane just stat increase here on the normal attacks. Again, remember that her passive ones count as basic attack damage. So getting a 30% bonus there is pretty huge. She also then gets the exclusive crime brain skill, Observer, which she summons this prism that will basically combat her main weakness of not being able to really dish out damage in case there's only 1 enemy on the field. That's basically to say that if the attack is trying to bounce, but there are no like enemies in range, well then it will try and find the prism instead. If the prism is in range, well then it will just bounce off the prism instead. So yeah, I mean, this is not going really to be the, I think, it's not like huge. It is nice if you can get in a scenario where you basically only have 1 target and the prism in the range. But like, if you imagine BFL, if you imagine Pit, those kinds of scenarios are really, really hard to come by. Especially when you consider the fact that her bounces do still have the diameter range. It actually kind of works against her here, because it does lower her burst damage potential. but it's still a fairly nice tool she has in case the situation does arise. So yeah, that's basically it for her base kit. It's really focused on like just dealing consistent damage output with these bounces with her normal attacks. It's really nice to see. I think it's a pretty strong kit, and it's pretty healthy for what I would consider limited sinner like power level to be at. Overall, I think like she basically hovers on being like, you know, kind of a wave clearer, but she also does have some bursty and supportive capabilities with her ultimate. They are quite a versatile and well-designed unit, I think. But some of her shackles can actually change that and kind of send her over the edge. I am not talking about the Shackle 1. The Shackle 1 isn't actually amazing. I mean, it does add one more bounce to the passive one, but that'll rarely be the difference between are you able to kill the boss, are you not able to kill the boss, and it'll rarely be the case, like difference between, oh, can you clear this wave or can you not clear this wave? It's nice, it's luxurious a bit, but it gets way better when we talk about it in the context of her Shackle 3. Because the Shackle 3 is absolutely broken. This is by far the strongest Shackle in the game. Like, it's not even up for debate. It is so far ahead of anything else we have in the game right now. Basically, whenever she attacks something, whenever an attack bounces to a target, that target will take additional damage. It'll take specifically 4% additional damage, stacking up to 5 times, so up to 20% additional damage, which lasts for 10 seconds. Now again, her passive one bounces count for the purpose of applying this, and they have a diamonded like Joanne ultimate range, right, to bounce off of. And when you have the Shackle 1 on top of that, well, then you have the initial target, and you have 5 additional targets after that. That's basically also say that you can basically consider this a map-wide and permanent just 20% damage increase taken to enemies. And again, it's a damage taking increase, right? Like, this buffs physical damage, it buffs magical damage, it buffs true damage. So yeah, it is really strong, and I think it's pretty clear to me, looking at this, then, that what you should be considering if you're going to be rolling for her is that, are you just going to be settling for the Shackle 0, or are you going to be going all the way for the Shackle 3? If you like her, if you want to go, like, if you want to use her long term, I cannot recommend this Shackle 3 enough. Like, you should be getting the Shackle 3. Even if you're free to play, though, I don't know if it's really plausible, but I would almost recommend it still. Yeah, she is limited. You can get a long way with just using some of the basic stuff that the game gives you. But yeah, her Shackle 4 isn't super impactful. I mean, it's just a standard kind of like BFL speedrunning thing. For long-term content, you typically want the opposite effect, where like it lowers the cost instead. But I mean, you can imagine scenarios in Pit, or you can imagine scenarios in BFL where you really want that upfront, just immediate nuke wave cleared. So it does have some applications, but I definitely favor Shackle 0 or Shackle 3 at being the main stopping points. Okay, I think that basically covers it for all of the kit breakdown. What I'm basically going to do now is that I'm going to be talking about her kit, basically in the context of what we already have available, right? So I'm basically going to be doing what I call a kit review, which is to say that we're going to be talking about Shalom's role in BFL, how do you think she would be performing. We'll do the same thing in TOA, we'll do the same thing in Pit. And I guess we'll talk about like Mania training as well, like Mania training / X stages. So they're kind of similar. I don't really consider them fully endgame, but we'll still talk about them a bit. I think we start off with BFL because I think that's the most interesting one. Because basically the scenario or the situation right now with magical BFL is that there are 2 very well-defined archetypes. We have the, what I like to call the Empower archetype. Uses stuff like the Eddie, stuff like the Irene. And I'll say technically Raven, but Raven is a bit more versatile. We then have the Last Stand sort of things that use stuff like the Luvia and the Serpent. Now this isn't saying basically that, oh, you can't use Eddie with Last Stand, or you can't use Luvia with Empower. No, it just means that if you're using your Luvia on your Empower team, well, then she's going to be dealing less damage than she could be. Similarly, Eddie in a Last Stand position, I mean, like, she would rather have you just empower her to another ultimate than she would have you boost her initial ultimate. So this is basically what this means. So the question is now then, where do we see Shalom fitting in? Well, to me, she's slightly favored in the Last Stand composition things, and this is basically just because of the way that her kit functions in this constant stream of damage output, right? her basic attacks, her passive one bounces, all of them are going to be affected by Lost Sand, so it's just going to be a huge increase for her damage overall. However, naturally, you can still use her in the empower composition of things, but she will be kind of competing with Eddie about who gets the empowers. I think most people will even still favor Eddie in that regard, because she does have the more, I think, upfront boss killing potential. But yeah, I mean, a common complaint you can find in this team composition is that it kind of lacks wave clear. So Shalom will still be a great addition to it. But yeah, she will be dealing more damage, I think, if you use her in the Last Stand side of things. Yeah. The other thing I kind of want to talk about then is that the Serpent and Shalom, right? Because a lot of people look at these two and go, oh, well, they're both wave clearers, right? So they're fulfilling the same role. I was like, yes and no. Me, when I categorize wave clearers, I like to do so in different ways, right? We have what I like to call burst wave clearers, and we have consistent wave clearers. The difference basically here is how are they clearing the waves, right? A burst heavy wave clear will basically be doing something like Serpent, right? Where a lot of the cases she's here, she just does her auto attacks, then she spins and she clears the entire wave. And then she spins and she clears the entire wave, and then she spins. Something like Shalom will basically just be having a constant output of damage that clears out all the waves. Which is really nice in certain situations, and sometimes you kind of want the burst out of things. Basically, you can imagine a scenario where you either have a massive just wave of like 20 enemies coming out, and one spin will take out care of all of them. But then you imagine maybe having those same 20 enemies spread out in a line that comes out. Well, in that case, these spins are going to be slightly less favorable in that scenario. The other categorization we can make is a tile versus target-based classification. Now, I will say though, I personally favor like tile-based wave clearing. I'll say like 90% of the time. But basically, in this case, it's basically saying that Serpent's wave clearing is a 3x3 tile around her, or 3x3 area around her, which is super useful when you consider, oh, well, what if I have like 50 enemies I need to clear, or maybe not 50, but like 12, right? Like a high number of enemies that are all like densely compact, or densely packed. In that case, the tile-based wave clearing is really, really, really nice to see. However, what if we then took these same 12 and we split them into groups of like, I don't know, 3? And we gave them all different spawn points. In this case now, you need to do 6 attacks with Serpent, then you move her up here to spin, then you move her, you do another 6 attacks, then you move her to spin again, do another 6 attacks, then you move her to spin, and so on, right? This is kind of where like the Serpent wave clear doesn't really feel super super nice and super effective. In a case like this, Shalom would be way better because she has the consistent damage output. She's just target based. You just clear out one wave, then you move her to the next wave, and you move her to the next, and move her to the next, right? Super simple and super nice. All I'm basically trying to get at here is that yes, they do fulfill the same role of being wave clearers. However, the nature in which they do this is very different, and they actually complement each other rather than get in the way of each other. There's also another thing we haven't really seen yet in the magical BFL side of things, which is split lanes when it comes to enemies, right? This is something we see sometimes in physical BFL, something like Skeleton Mutant, and we see it in Holy Flower. You basically just have the boss sitting here in the middle, and you have 2 waves, 2 lanes coming out. In this case, it would be really, really nice to having a secondary wave clearer, such as Shalom to take care of one side, and possibly Serpent to take care of the other. We did see a bit of this in something like Molten, but we haven't really seen them fully lean into it, stage design wise. Okay, that was basically just in general Shalom in terms of BFL and wave clearing. Stuff of that nature. She'll be really good in either composition that you have, and just be a great addition overall. At Shackle Free, however, she actually becomes quite literally, I think, in my opinion, like completely broken. Because if she is shackle free, she then gains the ability to sneak herself into your physical and your mixed team setups. Because again, it's a damage taking increase. It's universal. Combine this with the fact that she features a 2x core break naturally. I mean, you're just having an amazing support unit here. Like, right, this is basically just... This is the best way to put this is that this is Che. If his amp was just immediately applied, or not immediately applied, but like applied to every enemy on the field, You still retain the 2 core break. Now, obviously, Chair is a bit more versatile. You can use him earlier on. And he covers a lot more ground. But I think you still get what I'm trying to get at here. Like, this is incredibly potent as a support character, even in physical BFL. So yeah, that is basically what you unlock by getting her shackle free. And obviously, like, if you have a shackle free, use her in a magical, well, you're just going to be having the easiest time of your life, basically. Okay, I think that covers it basically for BFL. Just to basically sum up then my thoughts. If you're dealing with a shackle 0 to shackle 2, I think she'll be a tier 0.5-ish. This is mostly because, like, yes, she is nice, she does complement something like Serpent, but you ultimately don't need it, right? You just need one or the other, and you'll be fine to 240k basically anything. But yeah, I mean, the 2 core breaks does give her a bit more versatility in terms of team building, but ultimately I think a tier 0.5 is fine. Like, she doesn't dominate the meta, I think, at tier at these shackle levels. Shackle 0, I mean, shackle 3, sorry, this is just tier 0. Like, at this point, she is becoming the best option for basically any boss to bring along. So yeah, I mean, again, if you really like her, definitely recommend a shackle 3. Okay, TOA. TOA is a bit hard to assess, right? Because, like, TOA is definitely where I see her. Let's split this up into shackle 0 and shackle 3 again, or shackle 2 again. Shackle 2, shackle 3. Where do we see her damage landing? Okay, well, her shackle 0 to shackle 2 has a huge problem in that, like, just her kit in general has a huge problem here in that she doesn't have a passive 1 and a passive 2, basically. Throughout the entire first 2 minutes and 30 seconds. Which makes me think that her damage output is going to be slightly low, but, like, then of course you get the prism on the final break, which is the most important break, and that's probably going to have her catch up in a lot of damage. Ultimately, though, I don't see her dealing, you know, amazing amounts of damage. I think we're going to be hovering around the 1 million. Basically, to put it in a range, I think we're looking at 1.75 to 2.25 million base contribution here. It's a bit hard to say where she lies exactly. I highly doubt we're going to get to this level here. I think she's going to be hovering somewhere like around the 1 million overall. However, if you do get the shackle free, and I have a pretty good idea of what her base contribution is going to be here, because I measured the Langley shackle 1 base contribution, which was 150k additional damage or something like the shackle free Sawyer. And if we just take that and double that, and we say, okay, we have 3 targets to deal approximately that amount of damage, well, then she's going to be dealing 9k base and contribution, which is basically going to be taking her from 1 million up to 1.9 million. Which is then to say that this is basically Nox levels, it's basically Chameleon levels, like, this is basically top tier again. For my own tier list, this will rank her at tier 0.5 as well. Whereas this shackle 0 to shackle 2 will probably be ranking her at about tier 2. I think it's pretty safe. If she's down here, it's tier 3. If she's here, it's tier 1.5, I think. But I think we're going to be looking at something like a tier 2 here. This is a huge leap again. Shackle 3 is completely busted. There's also the added benefit, actually, of Shalom in this kind of context, right? Because, again, I keep saying this, but shackle 3 is universal damage increase. And also links nicely into if you have something like the Irene shackle free, because it can be really hard to find a slot or a reticle slot to fit into an Irene composition. The only one that really works is shackle 1 Langley. So if you have Shalom, obviously she fits in nicely there as well, and doesn't really inhibit any of your team building options. So yeah, T2 if shackle 0 to shackle 2, and T0.5 if shackle 3 plus. Okay, almost done. Pit. Pit, I think, is going to be one of the areas where she's going to be really, really strong. However, the thing about Pit is that Pit typically rewards tile-based wave clears. It also, I think, typically favors burst wave clearing, because, like, the quicker you clear the wave, the faster the next one spawns, right? However, the waves I don't think are big enough. Like, typically the waves are not big enough for this to be a full problem for Shalom. I think even like with the size of the waves, you can basically consider her tile based, because if you have at least Shackle 1, you're probably hitting every single enemy anyways. So yeah, I don't think she's going to be dominating this meta by enemies, especially not if we're looking at Shackle 0 to Shackle 2 again. She won't be dominating by enemies, but she's really, really, really strong here. I think basically just a tier 0.5 is fairly reasonable for her. I mean, she has consistent damage output though, so that is definitely an argument in her favor. I think tier 0.5 is fair for that. She's consistent damage output, right, and that is really important because it means that she isn't as reliant on energy consumption buffs as some of the other Sinners. Now, I think once again, if we're looking at Shackle 3, I don't think Shackle 3 matters a ton in Pit, but there are typically a boss. And that boss just having it take 20% additional damage is going to be huge in a lot of cases. So, I mean, I kind of just want to give her the T0 for that alone. So yeah, I mean, obviously she's hugely rewarded in this game mode. It favors wave clearing. She has that, and she also has her ultimate as a kind of like, you know, intense wave clear tool. It does take a while to complete there, but I mean, it usually probably won't be the difference maker between whether or not you're getting the 40k or you're not getting the 40k. Okay, I think the last thing then to talk about is the Mania training / X stages, and I mean, she's just going to be amazing here. I actually think this is where probably her Shackle 3 matters the least, because oftentimes we don't have a boss in these game modes. Just have ads, and those ads typically don't like take that much to kill. I mean, obviously the Shackle 3 is going to be nice to have, but it usually won't be a big difference maker here. I mean, I think she's just going to be really, really strong in either case, because like her bounces are just going to be going all over the map. She's just going to be dealing a ton of damage to all the enemies. Yeah, I think that basically covers all of it then. Like, just to give you my overall like thoughts on her, I think if you have Shackle 0 to Shackle 2, I do hate my general tier lists and all that, but I know a lot of people love asking me about them. Where do I see her fitting in? I think she's tier 0.5. At Shackle 3, she's tier 0. I think you can make an argument for tier 1 as well, depending on how much you love, how much you value something like TOA here. But I think tier 0.5 is a valid tier for her. I do want to also finally end off this video. We're talking about some of the synergies that you could employ to her, and one of some of the synergies that if you have them built, her value rises, right? Like naturally, we spoke briefly about the Irene Shackle 3. But there's also the more quote-unquote cheaper options such as Chameleon, because Chameleon, of course, her passive 1 boosts the normal attack damage for her further. We then also have something like Ovo for her ultimate crit rate increase, because again, the bounces can crit. You then also just have stuff like Coco, the other S rank that it is releasing here, because she is also based on normal attack damage. There are basically a lot of different sinners that you can look to synergize with her. But yeah, ultimately I think she's a really, really good and well-designed sinner. I do think the Shackle 3 is a bit overtuned, but it is what it is. Overall, I hope this then covered all of the questions you may have had for Shalom. If you have any further questions, if there are anything I went over too fast, I know I talk a bit fast, especially when I need to speak for like 30 minutes straight, so I really apologize for that. But if there's anything that's confusing to you, if there's anything you want to have me like expand upon, feel free to just ask me in the comments below and I'll do my best to respond to them. Alright, I think that'll then cover it. So yeah, thank you guys so much for watching, and maybe I'll do Coco as well, I don't know. This was actually really hard to do. But yeah, see you guys.